Hey guys, it's Bella. Welcome back to my channel, or if you're new here, welcome. I hope you guys are all having a wonderful day today. In today's video, we are going to be covering another Mystery Monday case, and we're going to be talking about an Australian case that is so incredibly infuriating. Like, I guarantee by the end of this, you guys are going to rage, because I did. When I was researching this, I was enraged. Truly. Before we do get into it, I just quickly want to thank today's sponsor Audible for making this video possible, and I just want to say how grateful I am to be working with one of my favorite companies again. I just feel blessed. I love Audible. They have such an amazing selection of audiobooks, of podcasts, Audible originals, and more, and there is seriously something for everybody. Like, if you like listening to true crime, psychological thrillers, romance, if you're into wellness or celebrity memoirs, seriously, there is something for everybody. And with the Audible app, you can listen to them anywhere at any time. Personally, I love listening to an audiobook when I'm driving in the car or when I'm walking Mia. I always have a good audiobook on. It makes walking so enjoyable. Like, I kind of forget the time because I'm just walking, listening to my audiobook, and I'll look down and be like, oh my god, have I been walking for that long? Go me. There is actually an audiobook on this case called Joe CINQUE's Consolation by Helen Garner, which, if you find this case interesting, I would highly, highly recommend. I found it to be a really interesting listen, and you could check it out with an Audible membership, because with a membership you get one free title every single month to keep forever from their entire catalogue, including bestsellers and new releases. Or you could also check it out on a 30-day free trial, which you can get if you go to audible.com/Bella Fiore, or if you text Bella Fiore, helps if I can pronounce my own name, to 500. And with this free trial, you can explore their entire catalogue, and you will also get one audiobook for free. So I will make sure to leave all of the information for that in the description down below, so you can check that out. And let's go ahead and get into the case. So today we're going to be talking about the case of Joe CINQUE. He was born Giuseppe CINQUE on the 11th of June in 1971, and he was actually named after his grandfather, but he was known by friends and family as Joe. He was born to parents Maria and Nino CINQUE, who were both Italian immigrants. And when I was watching their interviews while I was researching this case, you can just tell how obviously heartbroken and devastated they are by what happened and the consequences of what happened. And Joe was just their everything. They were a really close family. 4 years after Joe was born, they also had a son named Anthony, and the four of them were just so close. They were so tight-knit, and together they lived in Newcastle, which is about 170 kilometers or 105 miles from Sydney. And, you know, every night they would sit at the dinner table and they would have dinner together, and they would tell each other about their days. There were photos and trophies of the boys and the family all around the house because they were so proud of their children. They were just, they were just a really close family. I know I've said that like 3 times now, but I don't know how else to say it. And, you know, Joe loved sport. He was naturally very athletic, and during school he played pretty much every sport he could. He played cricket and soccer and tennis. He was well liked at school by classmates and also by teachers. He was just, you know, a really social, vivacious, extroverted guy. He could hold a conversation with pretty much anyone. He never had a bad word to say about anyone. Like, he just seemed like a really good person. And he was also really intelligent. He got good grades in school. And after high school, he went to university and he got a degree in civil engineering. He graduated from university in November 1994 when he was 24. And then after uni, he went and traveled around Europe for 2 months before coming back home, still living with his parents, and he got a job at a civil engineering firm in Newcastle, which his father and his grandfather were actually employed at as well. My voice broke a little bit there. as well. So in early 1995, Joe went out clubbing one night with some friends, which is where he met 22-year-old Anu Singh, and they hit it off pretty much right away. You know, Anu was this gorgeous, intelligent girl. She was born on the 3rd of September in 1972 in India to parents Pradyum and Surinder Singh, who were both doctors, and they immigrated from India to Sydney in 1973 when Anu was just a baby, and they settled in Strathfield where they had another child. Anu attended a Catholic high school there, and growing up she was described as a happy-go-lucky kid, but she did have some attachment and behavioral issues, and she was also super intelligent growing up, and she was the dux of her year 10 class. She graduated high school in 1990 and then moved to Canberra the following year to study economics and law at the Australian National University, where she met a guy named Simon, and they started dating in 1993. And during this relationship, Anu actually fell pregnant and terminated the pregnancy, which had been a pretty traumatic experience for her. She was also having a really hard time in Canberra. She missed Sydney, she missed her family, she was calling her parents a lot, and she kind of got into recreational drug use while she was living in Canberra. She had started smoking weed in year 10, but by 1993 to 1996, she was using cocaine, acid, speed, ecstasy, and meth, which was causing her to have hallucinations. So because she was having such a hard time, she ended up deferring from uni for a year and went back to Sydney to visit her parents, which is when, of course, she met Joe at the club in 1995, and like I said, they hit it off pretty much straight away and started seeing each other. Mind you, she still hadn't broken up with Simon by this point, so after visiting her parents, she went back to Canberra to study law at the Australian National University, and her and Joe continued a long-distance relationship during this time, which Simon found out about, and he broke up with Anu, as he should. So Joe and Anu started doing the long-distance thing, and I guess by 1996 things had gotten pretty serious. Joe was really taken by Anu, like he was really into her, and he would call her like up to 15 times a day, and every single Friday he would drive from Newcastle to Canberra to spend the weekend with her, which is like a 5-hour drive. It's like a 450 kilometer or 280 mile drive, and he would do that every weekend, and he would stay until Monday morning, and he would leave super early on Monday so that he could make it home for his shift, which was at like 9:30 a.m. on a Monday. So he would have had to be leaving, you know, Canberra at like 4 in the morning. Anu was also having some issues with her health at that time, and you know, when she was feeling unwell, Joe would just straight up leave work and catch a flight to Canberra to see her, just, you know, I guess to help her, make her feel better, make sure she was okay. So clearly he was very into her, and they seemed to have a pretty happy relationship at first. But Joe's parents were not into Anu because they could tell the relationship was not right for Joe. There was a very distinct change in his behavior after they started dating. He just didn't seem like himself. He seemed like he had changed from the relationship. They believed that she was controlling him. Like normally he was a very extroverted, vivacious person, but whenever Anu was around, he just kind of sank into the background. She would lead the conversation, and he was just kind of there.
I call the devil because she's worse than a devil. It wasn't himself anymore. She demanded too much of him.
When I was talking with my son, she was talking somewhere else. Soon she saw my son Joe was talking to me, she come and grabbed Joe from his back and started to talk, kiss him, this and that. I thought, not only once, maybe 4, 5, 6 times.
As I mentioned earlier, the family had dinner every single night together, and they would do this at 6 p.m. But after Joe and Anu started dating, she would call Joe at like 6:10 p.m. every single night. So Joe would get up and he would answer the phone and he would leave, and he just wouldn't have family dinner with them because they would be on the phone for like an hour and a half, which was obviously really upsetting to Maria and Nino because this was an important family time for them. So Maria actually answered the phone a few different times and was like, hey, look, you know, we have dinner at 6 p.m. every night. Would you mind just waiting until 7 p.m. to call, and then you can talk to him for as long as you want? And she did this a few times, and I don't think it worked. I'm pretty sure Anu just continued to call like right after they started their family dinner. Eventually in September 1996, Joe ended up moving to Canberra to be with Anu, and they moved into a townhouse together on Antle Street, which is in the suburb of Downer, and that was about 4 kilometers or 2.5 miles away from Anu's university. So it was a really popular place where a lot of university students lived because it was so close to the university. And during this time, Joe and Anu also set up a joint bank account called Joe and Anu's marriage fund. So things were getting pretty serious, I guess you could say.
We didn't want him to go there. We were so upset. We didn't want Joe to go down there.
Now, by this point, Anu had stopped taking the drugs that she was previously taking daily, which brought on some pretty bad withdrawals, depression, and she also developed an eating disorder called bulimia, where she would basically binge eat and then she would purge by either self-induced vomiting, fasting, or taking laxatives. And she lost a lot of weight, and her parents were really concerned. She would go up to them and she would pull her shirt up, you know, just to show her stomach, and she would grab a little bit of skin and say, look, it's fat. And, you know, by this point she was only drinking Coke and she was only eating Tim Tams, and her parents tried to convince her multiple times to go and see a psychiatrist, but she just refused, and they were really concerned for her. And at one point she actually tried to convince her dad to book her in and pay for her to get liposuction, which didn't end up happening. And so then she started complaining of some other health issues she believed that she was getting. Like, she said she had really bad aching legs, she had bad pains, she had hot flushes, and she felt like there were things crawling underneath her skin. By May of 1997, Anu became completely fixated on her health, and she started to believe that her muscles were gone, that they had been deteriorating or they had been eaten away. And she actually did go and see a doctor about this, and the doctor told her, look, physically, there's nothing wrong with you. This is purely psychological. But Anu didn't believe that. She didn't believe there was anything wrong with her mind, that the issues were all with her body. Her body had problems. And after this, a few months later, she started to convince herself that she had AIDS. And she was telling a friend that she thought it was really unfair that she had AIDS and Joe didn't have AIDS. So she planned to actually put some of her infected blood on his toothbrush. But she went and got an AIDS test, and the AIDS test came back negative. She didn't have it. So after that, she started to convince herself that she had a nervous system issue like multiple sclerosis. So eventually her parents actually did manage to convince her to go and see a psychiatrist, and this psychiatrist tried to recommend some like pills or some drugs for her to take to combat these feelings that she was having, but she absolutely refused to take these pills, and she refused to go to any more appointments. During this time, Anu's parents were obviously extremely concerned for her, and they tried to help her. They tried to convince her to get help, and, you know, obviously she refused. So they called the mental health crisis team multiple times, but they were told that because she wasn't considered a danger to herself or to others, that she couldn't actually be admitted without her permission. Joe was also by her side throughout all of this. He was trying to help her. He was just trying to be there for her and support her while she was dealing with all of these health issues. But then she started to say that her undiagnosed conditions were a result of ipecac syrup, which she had taken large doses of because this syrup basically helps to induce vomiting. And she blamed Joe for this. this because, you know, he had mentioned this syrup in like an offhand comment. He didn't tell her to take it or anything, but at one point I think they were talking about models and how models were so skinny, and he was like, you know, I think it's because they take ipecac syrup because it helps them to vomit. And so Anu heard that, she went and checked it out, she started taking it, and so she resented Joe for inadvertently introducing her to this syrup.
For me, this is completely and utterly incongruent with Joe. Number one, because he never took drugs, and number two, I'm sure he didn't even know what it was.
And similarly, she blamed Joe for a lot of her health issues, you know, even though he had done nothing to her. He had been nothing but supportive and been there for her while she was trying to navigate these health issues. She just believed that Joe was the reason for a lot of her problems. And she went to people at her school and, you know, friends, acquaintances, and told them that she wanted to go on a rampage and she wanted to kill Joe and she wanted to kill herself. And she also told people that she, you know, she did law, she had studied psychiatric texts, so she knew how to convince people that she was insane. She also had this other friend named Madhavi Rao, and she was also a very intelligent law student at ANU with Anu, and she was described as a bit of a doormat to Anu. Like, I guess she really just would do whatever Anu suggested, and together they actually went to the library and researched suicide and assisted suicide methods. And I think the thing is that at this time, Madhavi knew that they were researching these assisted suicide and suicide methods because Anu had told her as well that she planned to kill Joe and kill herself. So they were like researching how to do that together, instead of Madhavi being like, hey, maybe don't do that. Maybe don't kill an innocent guy. By August of 1997, Anu started to sell her clothes for really cheap, like $1 to $2, and she was giving away her CDs for free, which she claimed was just because she didn't go out anymore, so she didn't wear the clothes, and she didn't listen to any of the music on those CDs anymore. But her parents were really concerned by this behavior, and they actually called the dean at ANU and said, hey, you know, has she been going to classes at all? And he said, I can't tell you that information because she's an adult. So then her parents tried to submit an application to the mental health crisis team to actually have Anu admitted without her permission. But unfortunately, these applications have quite a lengthy process, so there was really nothing they could do but wait. During this time, Anu spoke to multiple friends and acquaintances too, just like from her uni courses. So these were like intelligent law students, and none of these law students thought to say, hey, maybe you shouldn't do that. Nobody thought to talk her out of it. In fact, they actually said, I know how you feel, and if you want to do that, you should do it. I think, you know, they knew she was sick, or that she thought she was sick, so that helped them justify it. And to get even crazier, she told these people as well that she was planning to either sedate Joe so he couldn't stop her, or she was going to murder Joe and then herself. And nobody tried to talk her out of it. Nobody tried to call the police. Nobody tried to tell her family. Nobody tried to warn Joe. Like, that is the craziest part about this to me. She's out there telling people like, hey, I might kill my boyfriend and then kill myself, and no one's like, hey, don't do that, or call the police or anything like that. And they're law students. Like, how are you going to go and enforce the law, or try and enforce the law, when you're not even going to contact the police or contact anybody when somebody tells you that they might kill their boyfriend? So toward the end of that month, Anu and her friend Madhavi went and spoke to their other classmate named Mr. T. And Anu had actually first spoken to him in one of her classes, I believe, and kind of said to him, hey, you know, do you have, or is there any possibility that you would be able to get me a gun? And he apparently thought that this conversation was a joke, despite the fact that a couple days later she contacted him again and was like, hey, what about that gun? You know, can you get me that gun? I have these illnesses due to ipecac syrup that I'm dealing with, and I want to end my own life. And there are some conflicting reports about what Mr. T did, whether Anu kind of changed her tune and asked for some heroin, or whether Mr. T said, hey, actually overdosing on heroin would be a better alternative to shooting yourself. I mean, I'm genuinely hoping that the latter is not true, that someone didn't approach him wanting to end their own life, and instead of trying to talk her out of it, he said, actually, you shouldn't end your own life one way, you should end it this other way, because that's kind of easier. But the way that this case went down, I just don't know. And you'll see what I mean later on, like when we get further into it. Either way, Anu and Madhavi ended up going to Mr. T's house a couple of days later to talk about like the logistics of a heroin overdose. And he told them that, you know, it would be pretty instantaneous. Once you injected the lethal amount of heroin, you would stop breathing, you would die within a couple of minutes, and it would be pretty painless. And he told them that it would take around $50 to $100 of heroin to overdose if you weren't a regular user. And Anu was like, great, I'm not going to buy any heroin today because I don't have the money, but when I do have the money, I'm going to come back and I'm going to buy some. And about a week later, Anu calls him up and says, hey, I want to buy about 0.5 gram of heroin. And he says, great, no worries, come over. So Anu and Madhavi go to his house. Anu pays him $250, buys $250 worth of heroin, and he then injects himself and injects both Anu and Madhavi with heroin to teach them how to inject themselves and how to inject somebody else. In September of 1997, Anu went and saw a university counselor, and she told them that Joe was abusing her both physically and verbally, and he was apparently blaming the abuse on her, saying he had never hit a woman in his life before, but she said that she couldn't leave him because she was emotionally and financially dependent on him. And just before we get any further, we will get into this later, but I just want to say now and clear it up now that we found out later that this is actually a load of shit. And Anu later admits that this wasn't true. Joe was not abusing her. In October 1997, Anu showed up at Mr. T's house again and said that she wanted to buy $500 worth of heroin, which is a full gram. And he's like, you know, no worries, come in. He loaded up 2 syringes for her and he injected her again as kind of like a re-demonstration of how to inject yourself or inject somebody else. And he asked her while she was there, you know, why do you want so much heroin? And she said, somebody else is coming with me. And he said, what do you mean? Someone else is ending their life with you? Who is that? And she told him, you don't need to know who it is. And he didn't press any further questions. After this, Madhavi also helped Anu acquire some Rohypnol tablets, which are also known as roofies or the date rape drug. It's like a really powerful tranquilizer. And they managed to get this off another classmate who we'll refer to as B. And B was also a heroin user, and she managed to get them 15 Rohypnol tablets. And she told them, look, if you're going to use this with heroin, only 1 roofie is needed to knock a person out. On Monday, the 20th of October in 1997, Anu decided to host a farewell goodbye dinner for her and Joe because she was planning on killing Joe and then ending her own life that night. And she and Madhavi invited friends, classmates, acquaintances, people they didn't even know who were just law students because, like I mentioned, the place where Joe and Anu lived was a very popular student housing accommodation. And Anu had Madhavi literally go around to some of these houses of people they didn't even know, knock on the door and be like, hey, do you want to come to this like goodbye farewell party? And all of the people at this dinner knew the purpose of this dinner. They knew that it was a goodbye/farewell party, that Anu was planning to kill Joe and then end her own life afterwards. And they decided to come along to see the lead up out of morbid curiosity. And everybody knew but Joe. Nobody warned Joe. Nobody tried to talk Anu out of it. Nobody contacted the police or the authorities or anything. And these are law students. They're pretty far through their law studies. They know the law reasonably well. They're studying to become lawyers, to uphold the law, and they came to see a potential murder-suicide and didn't say anything. It's insane to me. Madhavi even showed friends the needle mark on her arm and said, you know, Anu injected me with heroin to practice injecting it into Joe so that she can kill him later that night. And no one did anything. It blows my mind. So the dinner party goes ahead without a hitch. Anu is really happy all night. She's really loving towards Joe. And apparently the people at the party thought that this meant that she wasn't serious about killing Joe and then ending her own life, that it was all some kind of joke. And Anu did have a reputation as a bit of an attention seeker and somebody who loved drama. So they kind of just thought that this was another one of her ways to get some attention. What I fail to believe about that is, if you thought it was a joke, why wouldn't you mention it to Joe? Or why wouldn't you mention it at the dinner table? Like, why would you purposely hide it from Joe if you thought it wasn't real? I don't know, I think that alone just makes me fail to believe that none of these people thought it was actually going to happen. So eventually everybody leaves, and as they're leaving, Madhavi is telling them, you know, it's still going ahead. It's happening tonight. Once all of you guys are gone, she's going to go ahead with the plan. And everyone's gone, and once they all leave, Anu crushes up a few, like 3 or 4 Rohypnol pills and puts them in Joe's coffee, which knocks him out. And she then goes and gets the heroin syringe, which has already like been pre-filled for her with heroin, but because it was so concentrated, it had actually congealed, so she wasn't able to inject him with the heroin. So he woke up the next morning super groggy. He just thought it was like a bad hangover, not knowing it was actually because his girlfriend had drugged him the night before and tried to kill him. So he kind of just went about his day, went to work like nothing happened. So after that first attempt didn't work and Anu wasn't able to kill Joe, she set up a second farewell party for Joe and herself on Friday the 24th of October. And again, she invited friends, acquaintances, people they didn't really know. There was about 10-ish guests there, and she told them herself, she was like, you know, the plan is definitely going ahead tonight, it's definitely happening. And nobody said anything, nobody called the police, nothing. And Joe didn't even know about this dinner party. He just got home and there was all these people in his house, and you know, he was a good guy, so he was very graceful about it. He welcomed them all, he had conversations with them about, you know, how excited he was because he just bought a new car and he had a vacation in Queensland coming up pretty soon. And these people had these conversations with him and didn't think to say, hey, you know what this dinner party's for, right? Like, you know why we're here. They're just listening to him talking about, you know, his exciting upcoming plans. And they didn't say anything. I know I keep talking about that, but it's just so unbelievable to me that none of these people thought to help this guy or to warn him. Even if they didn't think Anu was serious, surely they would just tell him like, hey, your girlfriend's a bit of a psycho and she keeps telling us all she's gonna kill you. Just thought you should know. Even if she's not going to do it, the fact that she's talking about it, you should probably know that. Again, the dinner party went off without a hitch. Anu was really happy all night. She was really loving towards Joe, and people stayed until the early hours of the morning. Madhavi was the last person to leave. She left at 6 a.m. and she went back to her place. She told like her friends or her roommates or whoever and said Anu crushed a bunch of Rohypnol pills into Joe's coffee, knocked him out, and then she tried to inject him with heroin, but he didn't die. It's amazing. It must not be his time to go. When her roommate or friend asked her, like, why is Anu trying to kill Joe? She said, well, you know, Anu just kind of blames him for everything, for all of her medical issues and that sort of thing, so she just wants to take Joe with her when she ends her own life. So surely this friend knew that this was serious and again, didn't try and notify anybody. Between 6 a.m. and 9:30 a.m., one of the dinner party guests, a girl named Tanya, said that she was going to tell Joe that Anu had given him and drugged him with 3 Rohypnol tablets the night before. So Anu and Madhavi went and showed up to another one of the dinner party guests' houses, a guy named Leonard, and they told him, look, Anu did give him 3 Rohypnol tablets the night before, but only to put him to sleep so that he wouldn't have to see Anu end her life and he wouldn't try and convince her not to do it. So then the 3 of them ended up convincing Tanya not to tell Joe. They said, you know, Anu said, you're going to ruin my relationship, you're going to ruin my life, just let me tell him. Let me be the one to tell him that I did that. And together they convinced her not to say anything to him. Later that same night at around 10:30 p.m, Anu actually called Leonard, and part of this call was accidentally recorded on his answering machine, and she was basically talking to him about how she was worried about the lasting effects of Rohypnol because she had given them to Joe obviously the night before, and he slept for 15 hours. He woke up just a little bit before she called Leonard, and he was still clearly affected by them. He was very groggy, kind of slurring his words a little bit, and at one point you can actually hear Joe get on the phone and he says, "She's worried for nothing, I'm fine, my mind's fine, my body's just a little tired, but it's all good." And they hung up the call, and that was that. After that phone call, Anu ended up calling Madhavi and saying, "Hey, can you come over and bring some food and stuff?" And she did do that, but they ended up getting into a fight because Anu started accusing Madhavi of being the one to drug Joe, and Madhavi was super pissed off. She ended up leaving, and after she left, Anu ended up crushing a few Rohypnol pills into Joe's coffee again, and when he passed out, she injected him with heroin. The next morning on Sunday the 26th of October at around 8 a.m, Anu ended up driving to Madhavi's house, waking her up and bringing her back to her and Joe's house, which is where Madhavi saw Joe on the bed. He was asleep, he was looking kind of blue, but he was still breathing at this point. So Anu then drove them to an ATM where Madhavi got $250 of cash out, and she gave this to Anu, and then they ended up getting into another sort of fight, and Madhavi ended up walking home by herself while Anu went and drove to Mr. T's house, which, if you remember, is the guy who sold Anu the heroin and taught Anu and Madhavi how to inject heroin, and she bought another $250 worth of heroin from him with Madhavi's money. Soon after this, Anu ended up calling Madhavi a bunch of times, and initially Madhavi kind of told her to, screw off, but eventually she was like, "Okay, come and pick me up," and Anu went and picked her up, brought her back to her and Joe's house, which is where Madhavi saw Joe unconscious on the bed, and she ended up leaving and going to Leonard's house, and she told Leonard that Anu had told her that the night before, when Joe had woken up from, obviously the Rohypnol and the heroin that she had given him, he told her that he was going to leave her. And so Anu roofied him again and injected him with heroin to try and kill him again. At around 12 p.m, Anu called the friend who had sold her the Rohypnol, who we called B, and she told B that she had given Joe Rohypnol, she had injected him with heroin, and that he was unconscious, his lips were slightly blue, and he was only taking about one breath every 10 seconds, and she basically begged B to come and help her revive him, and B said, "I'm not letting you drag me into this. You need to hang up the phone to me immediately and contact the paramedics." And Anu said, "Well, I don't want to contact the paramedics. I don't want him to get mad at me, and it's too late now. He's already gone." And B basically called her a selfish bitch and said, "If you call the paramedics, you're going to have an angry boyfriend on your hands, but if you don't call the paramedics, you're going to have a murder charge on your hands." So eventually, about 10 minutes later, Anu does end up calling 000, and this call sucked. It was super frustrating to listen to, read the transcripts of. She starts off by really calmly saying, "I would like to get an ambulance for a potential overdose on heroin." And then throughout the call, she goes from being very, very calm to being very, very hysterical. It's very up and down.
Yeah, can I get an ambulance, please? Well, he's not. He's vomiting everywhere. I have a person potentially overdosed on heroin.
Potentially overdosed.
Well, he's not. He's vomiting everywhere, blood and stuff. And the police just tell me is that a bad sign?
It's not good if he's vomiting blood.
And she's super evasive as well. She tells them, he's unconscious, he has brown liquid coming out of his mouth, and the operator tries over and over and over again to get her address so they can send an ambulance out to potentially save Joe's life. And she, they would say, "What's the address so we can send an ambulance?" And she would say, "Is it bad that he has brown liquid coming out of his mouth?" instead of giving them the address. And then eventually she gives them the wrong address and gives them the wrong name. She calls herself Olivia. And then eventually, she finally gives them the correct address, and the paramedics are sent out to the house. While the paramedics were on their way, the operator told Anu to give him mouth to mouth, and she said, "I can't, his teeth are closed, they won't open." And then eventually the paramedics did arrive, and they found Joe unconscious in bed. He was naked from the waist down. He had brown liquid and blood all around and all over his mouth, and he had a bloated stomach, and they immediately began trying to resuscitate him and save him. And Anu was extremely agitated during this time. She was pacing back and forth. She begged the paramedics to save him. She told them that she had given him Rohypnol, 4 Rohypnol tablets, and she had injected him again and again and again with heroin to put him to sleep so that he wouldn't see her end her own life, and she had planned to do the same thing to herself. Unfortunately, despite their best efforts, paramedics were unable to save Joe, and he died later that night. Anu was immediately arrested, and she was taken into the police station for questioning. One of the officers recalled that for somebody who was crying so much and who was hysterical, not once did she need a tissue to wipe her tears. Later that night, Joe's family just had a really bad feeling, so his mum Maria tried to call him, but Joe didn't answer. A police sergeant actually answered the phone, and at the same time, police officers actually showed up at their door, and when they answered, she said, "You know, what's this about?" And the officers said, "It's about your son Joe." And she said immediately she knew that Anu had killed Joe and that Joe was dead, and she didn't need to hear anything else, and she immediately broke down.
And he said, "It's about your son." As soon as I said that, I started screaming, "Please, don't say anymore. She killed him, did she? She killed him." Straight away I knew she did kill him. I started screaming, "Please don't tell me it's not true. It can't be true." That's when I knew it. It was a nightmare. Hasn't stopped.
And Joe's younger brother Anthony also punched a hole in the wall and said, "You know, that bitch killed my brother." And they ended up having to go to the morgue and to identify Joe. And their godson Robert was there, and he said that as soon as they kind of pulled the sheet down, Maria literally just collapsed into his arms. Like, she just collapsed into him. She was devastated. Both, you know, the whole family was completely devastated.
How can you see your child you give birth to, you feed him, you look after him, you bring up a man? I had to put him in there all day, and she's still alive.
It's just so incredibly awful. An autopsy and toxicology report was conducted, and they did confirm that Joe died of asphyxiation while under the influence of Rohypnol and heroin. And there was so much heroin in his system that they weren't able to determine if she had injected him in one huge dose or multiple smaller doses, but they did conclude that he was likely injected with one dose at 3 a.m. on Sunday the 26th of October, and again about 8 hours later. During their investigations, police found Joe's daily planner and found that he had written "Get ready to move" on Monday the 27th of October, which is the day after he died. And he had also drawn a little arrow to 6 p.m. that day saying "urgent." And they also didn't find any of his luggage at the house, so they believed that he was going to leave Anu that day.
He had just bought himself a new car. He had a real spark in his eye. I also got a sense that maybe there was a new chapter opening up for him, that it's time for me to go. Buying the car was a part of that, and Anu knew it. That's when she decided to do what she did.
Police also searched Madhavi's house, and in her room they found Rohypnol, alcohol swabs, pamphlets about arteries, drugs and veins, and used syringe packets. And they also found Anu's torn up diary, which proved that she had been depressed for some time, and she had also been planning Joe's death for some time. time. Police then arrested Madhavi and took her to the police station for questioning, and she was charged with murder, attempted murder, unlawful and felonious slaying, and administering of a stupefying drug. And then 3 days later, her parents paid her $100,000 bail, and she was released on the condition that she had to remain under her parents' supervision at their home in Sydney. Initially, Anu and Madhavi were going to be tried together, and their joint trial began on the 6th of October in 1998. But after 4 weeks, the trial was abandoned as the judge believed that the evidence accumulated against Anu would cause unfair and an unjust trial against Madhavi, and so he ordered for them to have separate trials, and they both exercised their right to have judge-only trials. Anu's solo judge-only trial began on the 22nd of March in 1999, and she pled not guilty by reason of diminished responsibility. And the defense argued that yes, Anu knew she had broken the law, but that she shouldn't be held criminally liable due to her mental health at the time. They claimed that she had untreated borderline personality disorder and major depressive disorder, and that she was lost in a delusional world where she truly believed that she was going to die from a degenerative disease. The prosecution argued that her acts were premeditated, deliberate, cold-blooded, and that she had been planning Joe's death in detail for months. They argued that if she was as depressed as the defense claim, that she would have gone through with the plan to end her own life as well. They presented her diary as evidence, which they had pieced together after finding it torn apart in Madhavi's room, and they said that this diary proved that she was rational, that she didn't exhibit any signs of mental illness, that she was capable of developing and maintaining normal relationships, and that she had been planning Joe's death for some time now, for months. They also argued that she watched him die. This wasn't a crime of passion. She watched him die over multiple days, injecting him with heroin multiple times, and when she finally called the ambulance and emergency services, she was very evasive, and it took her quite a while to even give them the correct address, which basically prevented them from being able to get there and give Joe life-saving medical help.
He took 2.5 days to die. He was tortured.
While in custody, Anu wrote a few letters, and in the first one, she wrote that she was going to write down how all of this happened so she could get it clear in her mind as well. And she then went on to describe step by step how she murdered Joe, starting with when her and Madhavi went to the library to research suicide and assisted suicide methods. She wrote that she initially planned to only end her own life, but after reading stories about loved ones who moved on with their lives and remarried after the suicide of a loved one, that she decided it was only fair that Joe came with her so that he couldn't move on and he could never remarry and have a normal life. This is another letter that she wrote her mum. She said, "The most wonderful man in the world loved me so much and would have made a perfect husband and father. Ruined. Perfect life. Ruined. Now everyone is better off than me when I had it all. I bet everyone is laughing at me now because of my own utter stupidity and selfishness. You must start preparing for my death now. My life is over. I made the wrong choice when so many others were available at the time. Worked with the druggies rather than Joe. Should have protected him and worked with him. Now so many lives are ruined. I wish these druggies were dead and not Joe. Not Joe. Mum, please, not Joe." The prosecution argued that these letters prove that she knew her actions were deliberate, selfish, and wrong, and further proved that she was of rational mind. The trial concluded on the 24th of June in 1999, and Judge Crispin declared Anu not guilty of murder, but guilty of manslaughter on the grounds of diminished responsibility. And this next part, I can guarantee, is going to really piss a lot of you guys off. Like when I told you you were going to rage, this is the time, because he sentenced her to 10 years in prison with a minimum parole period of 4 years, backdated to the time of Joe's death, so she would be eligible for parole in just 2 years. I'll give you a minute to soak that in, because what the how is that fair? I don't understand. And Joe's family, rightfully so, were pissed. and Marie started yelling at Anu. She called her a bitch, a demon, the devil, and she said, 4 years. Is that all my son is worth? 4 years. And she told the reporters outside the courtroom that she believed that Anu should have been sentenced to death by hanging. I mean, I just cannot believe that sentence, especially considering the fact this was an intelligent girl. She was a law student. She was pretty far through her law studies, and she had been planning this for months and had told multiple people that she could easily get away with a crime because it would be easy to convince people that she is insane. And I guess she was right, because 2 years in prison. Madhavi's judge-only trial began on the 10th of December in 1999, and she pled not guilty to the 4 charges against her. The defense argued that when she saw Joe in bed practically dying, he was unconscious, he died later that night, like he was dying when she saw him on the morning of Sunday, the 26th of October, and she told Anu, you know, I don't want anything to do with this plan anymore. Apparently when she said that, her duty of care towards Joe ended. She wasn't responsible for anything after that. Judge Crispin said, and I quote, "Isn't it a rather chilling concept that one could take part in a plan to kill somebody, go out and buy the drugs for the job, and then say simply, I'm washing my hands of it now. I've got no responsibility, let him die." I completely agree with that statement. It is chilling, but not chilling enough for Judge Crispin to find her guilty. He found her not guilty and she was free to go after assisting someone in killing somebody else. Judge Crispin said that it was undeniable that she was aware Joe was in danger, but this didn't prove that she shared Anu's criminal intent or aided in his death. I'm sorry, how? She knew Anu was going to kill Joe. She didn't tell anyone. She didn't warn Joe. She didn't warn Joe's parents. She didn't tell Anu's parents. She didn't call the police. And she helped her learn how to inject somebody else with heroin. She also helped her get the Rohypnol pills and went with her to buy the heroin. And didn't she at one point actually pay $250 for the heroin that ended up killing Joe? I'm sorry, but how did she not aid in causing his death? So the only repercussions of Joe's death is Anu got 2 years in prison. Madhavi got off. Nobody who attended the dinner parties knowing that Anu planned to kill Joe that night were reprimanded in any way. It's so unfathomable to me. Joe's parents, Maria and Nino, were so unhappy. They were devastated and they were pissed off, rightfully so. And, you know, when Madhavi was found not guilty, they were yelling and they actually had to be escorted out of the courtroom. And later that same night, Nino actually ended up collapsing and he had to be rushed to hospital and receive treatment for heart problems. Anu started her sentence at the Silverwater Correctional Complex and she worked there in the prison library and tutored other inmates. She also underwent psychotherapy and was prescribed medication used to treat a range of mental health issues such as OCD, anxiety, and depression. And eventually she was transferred to the Emu Plains Correctional Center where she was granted day release so she could go and attend classes at the University of Sydney where she got a master's in criminology. How nice for her that in the just 2 years she had to serve in prison, she was allowed to go out during the day and study and get a degree in criminology after killing someone. And Joe would never be able to do anything like that ever again. He'll never get older, get married, have children, have a happy life, do whatever he wanted to do. In October 2001, at age 29, Anu was granted parole after serving just 2 years in prison. In 2004, she breached her parole by smoking weed and served a whopping 3 months in jail. And in 2009, she was awarded a doctorate by the University of Sydney's law faculty for her thesis that she wrote about women who commit crimes, which was titled Offending Women Toward a Greater Understanding of Female Criminality. It is a 100,000-word thesis in which she discusses women in crime and also her own involvement in Joe CINQUE's death. Nino and Maria came out and said that this was a desperate attempt to stay relevant and to keep her name in the media. Anu also came out and said that when she told the university counselor that Joe was abusive towards her, that she had actually made that up. It was a lie, and Joe was not abusive towards her. Anu now lives in Sydney and is in a long-term relationship with another inmate who she met while she was on remand. Madhavi has since changed her name and moved to the United States, where she lives with her husband and children. And Joe and Anu's townhouse on Antle Street has since been demolished to make way for a government housing project. To this day, Nino and Maria still cannot understand why nobody came to Joe's aid. Nino said, "Why you don't call the ambulance? Why you don't call the police when you see a person dying? If you see a dog on the street from a car accident, you call somebody to help the bloody dog. It's a man dying. Why you don't call the ambulance?" In 2017, Anu appeared on A Current Affair and made a public apology to the CINQUE family. In the same program, Maria rejected Anu's apology and called her the devil, and she said, "Don't tell me this bullshit. You have killed the most precious thing I had in my life. My first son, my firstborn, the one that was going to carry his grandfather's name, is not there anymore." But that is everything for this case. It is truly so awful. I mean, the fact that 2 years in prison is the only repercussions anybody got for Joe CINQUE's murder is insane. I can completely understand why Nino and Maria would be so upset and so angry about this. So many people were complicit in this murder as well. So many people showed up to these farewell dinners. She literally held goodbye dinners, like, "Hey, I'm gonna murder him tonight. Come along and see the show." And nobody did anything. Nobody warned Joe. Nobody called the authorities. People helped her. Madhavi helped her get the heroin and the Rohypnol. It's awful. It's terrible. It's unbelievable. Truly unbelievable. But that is it for me today, guys. I hope you have a wonderful rest of your day, and hopefully I will see you in my next video. Bye, guys.